Well, let's get more on the final days of the battle for Nineveh from Simon Mabon. He's a lecturer of international relations with Lancaster University, and he joins me now via Skype. So we've been talking about this as the final days in the battle for Nineveh, and yet there are some reports that the battle here is tougher even than Mosul. Just how much does the Iraqi army and its allies have to do here?
Well, I think it's always going to be the case when you've got a struggle like this, that the final days are going to be the hardest, the days where people realize that there's very little option for them other than to fight and to try and fight their way out of things. So what we're seeing is Daesh figures, predominantly the foreign fighters, realizing that they've got very little option other than to try and fight to survive. So, of course, that's going to be incredibly bloody and incredibly violent. So I think you've got an incredibly difficult task on the hands of the Iraqi government and the Shia militias, that they have to deal with an increasingly vitriolic and increasingly violent resistance from what is left, that rear guard of Daesh fighters. And then I think that's when the real challenge really does start, and that's repairing and rebuilding across Nineveh.
Of course, because what sort of condition are the people who've been living in these areas formerly controlled by Daesh? What sort of conditions are they in?
Well, the footage that you just showed, I think, gave a pretty good example of the type of destruction that the towns and cities across Iraq are seeing, and people are having to live within those. Obviously, housing is a big problem. General welfare, the general infrastructure of a state is being destroyed. And that's obviously made more difficult by there being around 11 million people in need of humanitarian aid. Now, even if the international community can help out by providing that aid, there are questions about the extent to which the Iraqi government can actually provide it, the channels through which it can do that, the governance structures that were in place before the destruction of these towns and cities. So I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for normal life to continue because of this general destruction of infrastructure and institutions.
Those fighters in Ayadiyah, the Daesh fighters, many of them have fled from Tal Afar, but the Iraqi army still has to fight Daesh, who are controlling the border along with Syria. Will that be a tougher fight?
Well, I think it'll be a different type of fight. It will be obviously a fight with more Daesh figures, more Daesh fighters, but they'll perhaps be thinking that there is an option for them. They can retreat if necessary. So I think it will be a different type of intensity, perhaps. It will be obviously more strategic and less of a counterinsurgency type operation. But I think it will be a different type. But what we'll see is the fight against Daesh is proving increasingly victorious, as we start to see Daesh really withdrawing back into places like Raqqa, that the fighting intensifies there. So I think we'll start to see that type of conflict evolving over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, just a few months ago, Daesh controlled a third of Iraq. Now it's just down to 10%. What's been the game changer in this, do you think?
Well, I think in part it's been technology, as your little video showed, that the Iraqi army has used all of these different technological devices like drones to actually get a handle on the defensive strategy of Daesh. And then, of course, with the Iraqi army, you've got the internationalization force that's providing military assistance, financial assistance, and then you've got the popular mobilization units, which have obviously mobilized huge numbers of people to go and take the fight to Daesh. So you've got a really strong military force there, but it's a strong military force that isn't necessarily designed to keep the peace afterwards. And as I stressed previously, I think that's where the real challenges will start to emerge. How can you have all of these different institutions balancing with one another and making sure that all of the goals and the gains and the desires and the whims of each other are respected?
Simon Mabon, thanks very much indeed for that analysis.